Welcome back. Just before the break, we were talking to our distinguished guest today, Mr. Ian D. Richardson, formerly of BBC. We were talking about his time in China and those very momentous days of Tiananmen Square uprising. Yes, Ian, how did you get your information from the Chinese? Because I understand that they don't speak much of English.
Well, of course, I did have people who spoke perfect Chinese.
Mandarin or Cantonese?
Yes, and there were some of the correspondents who worked in China or visited China regularly. They spoke very good Chinese, but also a lot of the Chinese wanted to try their English out on you,
right,
so
yes.
you were able to communicate like that. But of course, the government officials never told us anything. That wasn't in their nature, and they still don't.
Right. Can we just for a moment go back to the Great Wall where we left to see? You said you turned around the telescope. And had a grand view of the square where everything was happening.
Well, it was fantastic to be able to have confirmation that the troops were gathering there, and the taxi driver was game for anything, and he said to me, "I'll take you down there," and I thought, my word, should I? At any rate, being a journalist, you can't resist a first-hand experience, so off we went, and as we drove down towards the camp, suddenly two soldiers stepped out and pulled us up, and I thought, my word, we're in trouble now. At any rate, they engaged in some conversation with the taxi driver, which I couldn't understand, and eventually we were waved on, and I said to him, well, what happened? He said, it's all right. He said, they only wanted a lift. And I told them, well, I couldn't do that because there was a foreigner in the back seat. So we were waved on. And so we drove right up to the camp and around it, turned around and went back and reported what we'd seen.
Great. Did you really witness the uprising? The tanks came and
no. I missed that bit of it because by that time I'd been there for a month, and the new team was brought in, so I didn't see, but it was very, very upsetting when I learnt about it. Yes.
Right. See, you said that you had your own people there. Probably informers those days?
The correspondents who were there, some of them were there permanently, and some of them I brought in with me on the team. I mean, they were very clever men, and there was also a woman who was extremely well informed, and so they were getting all the information. Our worry was that we wouldn't be able to get it back to London, because what was happening was that, if the Chinese didn't like things, they just cut people off. Now, in the BBC's permanent bureau, there was a studio. It was a very small radio studio connected on a fixed line to London, which was very vulnerable because, of course, it could be cut off at any time. So we were worried about that, and then we pondered what we might do, and the staff correspondent at the time took me upstairs and showed me around what else they had, and I said, "Is there any other? Have you got a fax machine?" He said, "Well, that's an odd story." He said, "We've been given permission to have a fax machine, and they've put a fax line in, but they won't let the fax machine through customs, so they're playing games with us." And I said, "Well, show me the fax line," and he showed me, and I said, "A fax line is just also a phone line." And he said, "Oh, yes." So we got a phone and plugged it in, and it worked. So what we did for the rest of my time there is we had we dialed London, found we could get straight through, and we locked the line with some equipment. And all the controversial stuff was being sent back over the fax line, and the non-controversial stuff was done out of the normal studio. And the Chinese never, ever rumbled what we've been doing.
So they were foxed.
Well, yes.
That was a good idea, yes, using the fax line for phone, see. You have had different positions in BBC, head of World Service, foreign correspondence, founding editor of BBC World TV, and founding...
As a founding editor, yes. There were three of us. Yes.
And founding managing editor of BBC Arabic TV.
That's right.
Did you find any difficulty, particular difficulty? I mean, what sort of audience you will be reaching, the listeners you will be reaching in the Arab world, because different regimes react differently to BBC?
Well, they didn't like us. They being most of the Arab world, any sort of dictatorship didn't like us at all. It was a very strange deal that the BBC did, with their fingers crossed, hoping that it would work. Mm-hmm. It did sort of for a little while, but our problem was that the original BBC Arabic television, the one that I set up, mm-hmm. Was transmitted via Orbit Television, which is Saudi owned, and we were told when this contract was done to go through Orbit that there'd be no interference in BBC. They understood that it was truly independent and would insist on mm-hmm. independence. Mm-hmm. However, they would object to anything that was what they considered culturally insensitive. Right. Well, of course, that covered all sorts of things. I mean, we had tremendous trouble with them complaining about almost everything. A lot of the stuff would be fairly well known. They didn't like seeing women in swimwear. They didn't like seeing women driving cars. They didn't like...
You also had problem with that film, Death of a Princess.
Well, that's what I was coming to, because Death of the Princess was the death of Arabic television, Mark I, because once that went out against the strongest objections to the Saudi Arabians, we were then shut down. I was phoned at 7:30 in the morning one Sunday and told by our correspondents in Jerusalem that we'd gone. The signal had disappeared off the satellite and wouldn't be coming back. So I had the very unfortunate and unpleasant experience of being told to go in that afternoon and shut the system down. Mm-hmm. Now, the irony of all this was the Saudis, having hated the idea that of Arabic television because it insisted on being independent, accidentally contributed to the fact that Al Jazeera got off the ground, because Al Jazeera was having trouble getting started because there weren't that many journalists mm-hmm. around who were skilled enough in what we would call our form of television. Yep. And so they were having great difficulties. Suddenly, when Arabic television was shut down, there was 150 people, journalists, mm-hmm. producers, editors, and everything on the market. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And a great many of them, the most talented ones, went to Doha, and suddenly Al Jazeera got started. Right. So, and without the collapse of Arabic television, the Mark I, because I have to say mm-hmm. Arabic television has since been revived and is working very well. Without that, they would have, Al Jazeera might not have happened, or certainly would not have happened in the form that it did.
Well, there's always something comes up after something goes down. You see. So,
that's right.
So Al Jazeera came up, And now they have a Sky Arabic too, isn't it? A Sky television also has an Arabic broadcast.
Well, there is a lot of Arabic television now, and it has been transformed, because when Arabic television was being started, you know, a lot of these television stations, the government television stations, they were, to put it bluntly, extremely boring, because they would always start the day with what the King or the Prime Minister or someone else had been doing, regardless of whether they'd been doing anything interesting or not.
Probably they didn't do anything interesting, so there was nothing to report.
Well, if they did anything interesting, they weren't going to tell their viewers and listeners. No.
I know, I remember, because I was there for some time, and when the satellites came, obviously I had 2 satellite dishes just on the top of my house, see, and I could probably see anything anywhere in the world, see. And the restrictions went down the drain, because you could see anything. See. And they're playing cat and mouse game. They would come and sometimes dismantle the satellite and then go away, and then people will come up again, and then they'll do it. And it was a business, see. Yes. But now everything has been normalized. You can sit there and watch anything and everything almost on your computer, laptop.
Well, that's right. I mean, it'd be an impossible job to suppress it all, but it was astonishing back then in the mid-1990s how bad a lot of this television was. I mean, I'll tell you a little story. I was in Beirut, where we were recruiting staff and so forth, and the Lebanese were very keen to get the BBC back into Beirut, into Lebanon, permanently, because they all had to leave. All the BBC people had to leave because it was so dangerous. Yeah. And it was astonishing that when we first of all went to the information minister, who then said, well, you must meet the president. I thought, oh, well, okay. So we went to see the president, and the president said to us, well, we'd really love you, the BBC, to set up a bureau here. And he said, you must go and see Mr. Hariri, who was later assassinated. So, you know, without any preamble, we were taken straight to the Prime Minister's office. One of the Arabs I had working with me said to me, do you realise if a bomb went off now, it would wipe out the entire Lebanese cabinet? And they were all waiting to see Mr. Hariri, and we were ahead of the queue, and we talked to him, and as we walked in, I was followed in by cameramen, and it was filmed. And I was told that it was the lead story on their main bulletin, and I thought, my word, really? Really?
That's a good PR for BBC.
Story? No wonder nobody wants to watch it.
But finally, unfortunately, Rafiq Hariri was bombed away.
Yes, that's right. And of course his son is having troubles as well.
Yes. Apart from this very interesting story about Beirut, see, did you come across other famous names like Robert Fisk in Beirut? He was stationed there. He used to report for Independent, write for Independent.
Yes, no, I wasn't there that long. We went there mainly to recruit people, and also the BBC was a bit worried that it was still a bit dangerous and we might be kidnapped, and I didn't want that, and nor did anyone else.
He did a very interesting 4-part series. It's a film for I think Discovery or some other channel, but from Beirut to Bosnia or something.
Yes, and what was his name again? Sorry, what was his name again?
Well, Ian, the time has come for us to take a break again.
Right, okay.
So, don't go away. We'll be back soon after this very short break. Thank you.